Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a joint strategic defense agreement on September 17th. According to reports, the agreement states that any attack by a third party on either country will be considered an act of aggression against both countries. The Associated Press reported on September 19th that the Pakistani Minister of Defense, on September 18th, Asif stated that under the latest agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, if Saudi Arabia requires it, Pakistan's nuclear program can be made available to Saudi Arabia. This means that Saudi Arabia has officially obtained nuclear protection from Pakistan. The impact of this news on the geopolitics of the Middle East, South Asia, and even the United States' considerations in these two regions will depend on the subsequent maneuvering of all parties. The diplomatic community is also particularly concerned about its effect on India and, when pressed about the situation, given that Pakistan is in a hostile state with India, the spokesperson for India's Ministry of External Affairs expressed hope that Saudi Arabia would fully consider the common interests and sensitive concerns between the two countries when handling bilateral relations. The diplomatic community believes that the relationship between India and Saudi Arabia will inevitably be affected by this development. In fact, during Joe Biden's presidency, the United States made significant efforts to court both India and Saudi Arabia, taking photos together to counter China, and even brought in the European Union to create the India-Europe Economic Corridor, claiming it was clearly intended to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. However, just like the small circle that Biden assembled during his term, what we saw were only photos of politicians shaking hands and cooperating with little actual action. 2 years have passed and this plan now seems to be in a state of stagnation. 2 years ago, at the Group of 20 summit, the India-Europe Economic Corridor, which the United States strongly promoted, was described by many media outlets as a strategic plan to rival China's Belt and Road. But looking back now, this transnational infrastructure project, once highly anticipated by Western observers, has almost come to a standstill. The grand vision, once touted as a new Silk Road, is gradually losing momentum amid complex geopolitics and divergent interests. At the Group of 20 summit in New Delhi in September 2023, the United States, together with India, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the European Union, and others, jointly announced the construction of an economic corridor, IMEC, spanning the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf all the way to Europe. The project envisioned infrastructure such as railways, pipelines, and electricity, and was described by Washington as a game-changing initiative. At the time, Western public opinion generally regarded this as a direct response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Biden emphasized at the meeting that this plan could bring unprecedented economic connectivity to participating countries. However, 2 years have passed and the project has made no substantial progress, gradually marginalized amid rising Middle East tensions and great power competition. The UAE, once a core member of the corridor, has also, as the Gaza conflict drags on, its relationship with Israel has rapidly deteriorated. Emirati officials have openly criticized Israel's actions in the West Bank have crossed a red line, and they pointed out that the Abraham Accords have already been undermined by extremist forces. Israel's airstrikes targeting senior Hamas leaders in Doha have further enraged the Gulf states. The UAE president and several ministers personally visited Qatar to express their support openly with Israel's opposition, according to Mar, a professor of Middle Eastern politics at New York University, Abu Dhabi. Marx interprets this as meaning that whether it is Iran, Israel, or any other external power, any interference in their internal affairs without the approval of the Gulf states is something the UAE cannot tolerate. He believes that Israel has squandered the warm and peaceful relationship it once had with the UAE, and now both sides have fallen into deepening resentment. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's attitude has also shifted. Having once promised to invest $20 billion in the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, it has now similarly lost interest in the project. According to reports, Saudi Arabia had originally planned to invest in a key railway project within the corridor that would connect the UAE and Jordan, but this plan has now been shelved. The Gaza war, similar to the situation with the UAE, has made Saudi Arabia even more resolute in insisting on the precondition of seeing progress for the Palestinians before normalizing relations with Israel. After multiple Israeli airstrikes, Saudi Arabia has also made it clear that it will unconditionally support any measures taken by Qatar. A clear contrast is emerging in the Middle East. In stark contrast, India recently signed a bilateral investment agreement with Israel. However, it is worth noting that although the India-Europe Economic Corridor was launched with great fanfare at the New Delhi G20 summit 2 years ago, the finance ministers of both countries did not mention this project at all in their subsequent joint statement. According to a researcher at the Middle East Institute of the National University of Singapore, Clemens believes that this investment agreement between India and Israel is New Delhi's way of cautiously advancing the corridor project. Measures taken for this purpose. Unlike the UAE, India has never insisted on carrying political baggage. Clemens points out that since the outbreak of the Gaza war, Israel has become increasingly isolated on the international stage, which has severely limited its ability to advance major economic projects. Therefore, for Israel, this new agreement reached with India is a political victory. At the same time, India is also taking the opportunity to deepen its relationships with other key partners in the project, especially with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. In other words, this project, which was once launched with much fanfare and involved so many countries and regions, is now being kept alive solely by India, at least from an economic logic perspective. However, even this effort is unlikely to reverse the project's trajectory. The project's intended purpose has been undermined. According to Christian Ulrichsen, a Middle East expert at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, recent regional developments over the past few weeks have already caused this small multilateral alliance of India, Israel, the UAE, and the US, along with its corridor project too. The project's feasibility is now in question. Furthermore, the joint defense agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is bound to create mutual suspicion between India and Saudi Arabia. However, the tense situation in the Middle East is not the only obstacle facing the India-Europe Economic Corridor. Washington's priorities have also shifted. Tyler, policy director at the Israeli think tank Signal Group, pointed out that the United States, once the most crucial driving force behind the project, is no longer interested. Earlier this year, when then-President Trump met with Indian Prime Minister Modi, he promised to convene a summit related to the corridor plan within 6 months. But as the deadline has passed, this promise has become empty talk. The US government's attention has already shifted to other matters. For example, in the recent tariff war, Trump imposed tariffs as high as 50% on India, citing its oil trade with Russia as the reason. This made New Delhi quite unhappy. During Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar in May, he continued to boast that he had mediated between India and the conflict between India and Pakistan, and even mocked India for denying his claim of brokering a ceasefire. At that time, he also did not mention the corridor project at all. The warming relationship between the United States and Pakistan only added fuel to the fire, prompting scholar Stoller to question the corridor project. The corridor project was originally a product of the United States' efforts to strengthen and consolidate the Abraham Accords and to promote the normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But now, what exactly is the US position on this corridor and on India-US relations? Meanwhile, under strong lobbying from Turkey, the Trump administration shifted its support to another corridor connecting Armenia and Azerbaijan. Turkey has longed to promote its own development corridor project ever since it was excluded from the India-Europe Economic Corridor at its inception. This plan intends to cooperate with the UAE, passing through Iraq to connect Turkey and the Gulf region, especially after the Kurdistan Workers' Party announced its dissolution earlier this year. Turkey is even more eager to use this opportunity to accelerate the advancement of this alternative project, but these moves have not only intensified the strategic competition between Israel and Turkey, but have also caused deep dissatisfaction in India. The Indian side believes that the United States' intervention in the South Caucasus region has undermined India's long-standing plan to establish a land route to Europe via Iran, Armenia, and Russia. The Israeli think tank INSS has pointed out that the current series of moves by the US government all reveal a disturbing trend. Europe's wavering has further intensified the uncertainty. INSS revealed that until not long ago, EU member states such as Greece, Italy, and France were fiercely competing for dominance over the European maritime export route in the corridor project, but now they have all abandoned the competition and agreed to cooperate under the supervision of the European Commission. The responsibilities for these projects have been transferred to the Middle East and North Africa Partnership Team under the Commission. Even more sensitive is that some European diplomats have begun to demand that Israel allow Palestinian participation in the construction of the corridor, a condition that is clearly difficult for Israel to accept in the current environment. In short, the project that Biden is pushing to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative has already become a complete mess. Some European officials have even privately admitted that the corridor project now appears to be a dead end. The conclusion is that this corridor, once hailed as a game-changer, has not only failed to achieve its intended effect, but has instead exposed the limitations of the United States and its allies in regional cooperation. It once again demonstrates that whether it is the US or the EU, when they enthusiastically launch projects, their approach to countering the Belt and Road Initiative is all talk and no action. The US has become a country that boasts but lacks the strength to support regional cooperation. Without putting real money into actual construction, there is no hope success. Looking at this failed project from another perspective, we can draw this observation. Don't assume that China's Belt and Road Initiative is so successful because it's easy. China's strong infrastructure capabilities are its foundation. Its continuous adaptation, adjusting cooperation to local conditions and timing, demonstrates China's long-term strategic thinking. After a decade of large-scale infrastructure projects, China now shifts focus to fewer, higher-quality projects, especially those benefiting local residents. This allows the Belt and Road Initiative to continue, becoming a signature brand of Chinese diplomacy.